Welcome to our special on the primary, the Oklahoma primary, June 18 is when they'll be counting the votes. And a veteran of many, many nights watching the results come in, my friend Jerry Bohnen. Good to see you this morning.
Yes, sir.
So, we're going to talk about the Republican primary for Corporation Commission. That has been, as I like to say often, present company excluded. There's not been much writing or broadcasting about that because, well, first off, the press corps is very small these days. Number two, there's a jillion races to cover. So I'm not really upset with it, but it's just a fact that we don't get as much information. And Jerry, 30 years ago, a corporation commissioner race was way out front. I mean, it would be in the front section of the newspaper. It would be in the first segment of the nightly news. And the characters, I mean, put your stamp on Hamp, and
Yeah.
um, didn't wasn't there a corporation commissioner named Rex Privet many years ago?
Mm.
Maybe that was a Marty Howland client, Privet, and it was a frog saying ribbit, and then the voice off camera would say no privet. I mean, it was the genius of a guy like Marty Howland years ago. But there have been some keep an eagle eye on rates, Norma Eagleton. I mean, there's been
Yeah.
so many really fascinating races and fascinating slogans. Today, it's much less in the news and it's much more subdued. But here's what's not subdued: these people have got a huge impact on people's wallets and their rates. And it's our favorite slogan about the Winter Storm 2021, the gift that keeps on giving in terms of news. And when we do our next Mitchell Talks Energy with Jerry Bohnen of OK Energy today, we'll be talking about Winter Storm Uri. I mean, it never
Yeah.
stops. So,
Yeah. Well, you're right. The Corporation Commission races this year, they have not received much publicity regarding, you're because they do have a great impact on Oklahomans. I've always said that, and I've made that statement on some of the interviews on Mitchell Talks Energy that it's one of the most powerful offices in the state of Oklahoma. It's a statewide office, and they control and decide upon the rates we pay for everything from natural gas to electricity to a number of other things. It's not just oil and gas.
sometimes when you are driving down the road and you see a big rig pulled over on the side of the highway, the flashing light, the officer that's got them pulled over, that'll be Corporation Commission.
That's
Okay.
true.
So
Yes.
there's probably less known about that than any function of government about how much power they have and unusual what's about to happen in this primary. Early voting has begun. Is that a long time corporation commissioner who's made a jillion headlines is leaving, and there's quite a race to succeed him. And we're talking about Bob Anthony. And Jerry, help us understand some of these candidates that are running to succeed Bob. But let's just before that, let me ask you the legacy of Bob Anthony. Are the candidates, are they running to replace Bob Anthony, the personality and sort of his philosophies, or are some of them wanting to move away from that?
Some are trying to succeed Bob Anthony in the style and mannerism and the whole concept of being a true watchdog for consumers when it comes to rate hikes. And the others, I'm not so sure about that. So, what do we have here? We have three candidates for the Republican nomination. I would judge based on just simply the historical aspect of it that Brian Bingman, the former Senate leader, the former Secretary of State, former Secretary of Native American Affairs in the state, who resigned last year to run for the Corporation Commission, is probably the front runner in this. I would base that on just simply name recognition. I think next in line would be Russell Ray, a longtime energy journalist who spent time as the editor of the Journal Record in Oklahoma City. And he was also the editor of the Power Engineering magazine for 9 years. And then he also spent several years as the chairman of an organization called Power Gen, which is the world's largest power sector conference. And so he is probably more in the mold of Bob Anthony than I would say Brian Bingman, or the third candidate, Justin Hornback, who's a Pipelines Local Union 798 union executive in Tulsa. He's from Broken Arrow. He spent 20 years in the engineering or the energy sector, largely as a welder and a pipeline inspector, which is a critical job when it comes to building natural gas and oil pipelines. So those are the three main hopefuls for the Republican nomination. I'd say, though, that that Bingman, again, is probably the front runner, but Russell Ray, who just within days after filing his candidacy suffered a heart attack and is making a health recovery in that respect. He's also, he thinks that basically the Corporation Commission right now, as it sits with Todd Hyatt and Kim David and then Bob Anthony, that two of them, and he's referring to David and Hyatt, are politicians and former legislators. And so if Bingman gets on there, as we've talked about, I believe previously, Bingman gets on there, we've got three former powerful legislators sitting on the Corporation Commission.
So, yeah, really powerful. And yesterday I got a kick. I was interviewing John Pfeiffer, who's the assistant majority floor leader of the House. And we were talking about the difference in the Senate and the House. He said, the House is the trailer park and the Senate's the retirement home. And some looks like, some of the senators are going to go over to the retirement home at the Corporation Commission, which is a tough job, by the way. We've gone on about that in our broadcast before. But Todd Hyatt was Speaker of the House, and he was the first when the Republicans took over. Todd Hyatt was the Speaker. It was the first one in history. Kim David was the floor leader in the Senate. Really, as they say in some places, that made the trains run on time. And Brian Bingman was the pro tem in the Senate. So it would be an all-star galaxy if Brian Bingman were to be elected. Now,
I don't know whether that's good or bad, depending upon how you look upon legislative leadership and, what those members do or have not done.
There is very little time for a person running for corporation commissioner to go knock doors. The statewide deal, you go to the chili suppers and then you go to the association meetings, that sort of stuff. But Jerry, the lifeblood of getting elected to the corporation commissioners to be on the air, be in the mailbox, be on the radio. Those are the sorts of things. And certainly Brian Bingman would have to be, as you've mentioned, clearly would have to be the favorite just because he's been able to finance a pretty aggressive, fairly aggressive media campaign.
Well, and remember, Bingman, when he announced his candidacy last fall, immediately drew the endorsement of Governor Kevin Stitt and the Lieutenant Governor, Matt Pinnell.
So he's got that going for him. What about the challengers? Have they had any sort of, you've interviewed them all.
Yes.
And when you've talked with them, have they said how they were trying to reach people?
No, they've not indicated that at all. And being only just a few days away from the primary, it's surprising that some organizations have not at least attempted to present candidate forums and things of that nature. I don't know where they're spending their money. I've not seen any campaign ads either. Have you?
I've seen very little.
Yeah.
But I'm with that 65% of the public right now that's trying to avoid it. I'm trying to avoid some of this because it can become a mental health challenge at some particular point.
And from the voter standpoint, a little bit of education here, and that is being a corporation commissioner. You are you are a judge, and that's how it's like a court. And so whenever attorneys approach them, they call them honor, your honor, et cetera, et cetera. And they do. It's a very meticulous job that they have to get into, and understanding the laws and the aspects of the regulatory enforcement by the Corporation Commission. It is not an easy job. For anyone who thinks they're just going to sit up there and take a vote on something, it's not that way. It involves a lot of time and calculation and effort to explore the issues.
Certainly a public service calling, because the first thing I think of when somebody announces they're going to run for corporation commission, and what's wrong with them?
Yeah.
that is not a glamorous job. It's a hard-working job.
It really is.
Can I ask you the issues that you think are going to be for the next commissioner? And there are a lot, by the way, there are a lot of 2-to-1 votes. Would I be correct in making that assertion?
Yes.
Commissioner Anthony on things over the years, 3 decades, right, on the commission.
That's true.
So some of the issues that name ID, people go and vote on that. But some of the issues that consumers are facing that are incredibly important, that these people will be having to take up, and how it will impact Oklahomans from the Panhandle to Southeast Oklahoma. There are some big issues out there right now.
Rate hikes, rate hikes, rate hikes. Whether it's by ONG, PSO, OG&E, or any number of other utilities in the state, that's what those commissioners will deal with. Now, I would argue or propose that should Brian Bigman get on, I think the concern among consumer groups would be that he is going to rubber stamp whatever decisions are made by Hyatt and Commissioner Kim David. That in that case, will we have anybody really delving into the protection of consumers and the amount of money that goes toward the rate hikes that could be approved by the utilities? And this has been a big sticking point for Commissioner Bob Anthony. I thought it was interesting that here a few weeks ago during one of the hearings, I believe it was on ONG, they gave the opportunity for the public representatives to come up and speak in person. And at least 2 people made the trip to the hearing and spoke. And this was a hearing in which Commissioner Anthony was not present. So you only had Kim David and Todd Hyatt on hand. No vote was taken. And in all fairness, Anthony could be monitoring from his office while he's doing other business. But both of the 2 respondents from the public praised Anthony and hoped that they appreciated his aggressiveness in protecting consumers. Now, whether that same aggressiveness will be absent when he's gone because he's term limited, that remains to be seen. But I would suggest that the consumer groups, AARP, and a number of others who constantly are putting up a battle against rate hikes, that they will be focused on that.
All right. You've succinctly summed that one up. Rate hikes, rate hikes. There is something we've been talking about for a couple of years now, this enormous amount of money that's being poured into transmission lines across the country. I mean, this is something, we create a huge amount of energy in Oklahoma. The problem that everybody agrees on is getting it out of here to take to Maine or to wherever the electricity needs to go. That has been, maybe for the last 2 years, right up there with the rate hikes and Winter Storm Uri, about how that money is going to be spent. Enormously expensive battles, hard-fought battles at the legislature over this. Is the next corporation commissioner going to weigh in on this? And you're reading my lips, which is ROFR. Is this something that could be in the near future that the Corporation Commission could be weighing in on, whereas the utilities wanting to get these ROFR deals done in the legislature, they didn't do that. So is this moving to the Corporation Commission?
It could. That and the performance based rate making, which recently the Corporation Commission received a report and recommendations from its Public Utilities Division that it should stick with competitive bidding and not adopt also the performance based rate making. Now, the ROFR, or the right of first refusal, is still going to raise its head. And that is in the sense of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, if you remember here a few weeks ago, came out with this proposal for the adoption of a massive effort to expand the transmission grid across the United States. And I had a story on this past week regarding one national organization because it was upset and disappointed that FERC actually, in adopting this regional plan or project or goal, chose to also allow right of first refusal to, and it did not include so much competitive bidding. So it's still going to be an issue, and it's going to filter down to the Oklahoma Corporation Commission. And another aspect of this, Scott, is that the Southwest Power Pool, if you remember, that's the 14-state regional grid of which Oklahoma is a partner, is expanding its grasp to include a couple of more western states to provide electricity to them. So this, in the effort to expand that grid, and it might include, of course, some power or transmission lines and projects that then we still might get into more of the ROFR issue there. So it's going to be closely watched, and the Corporation Commission will have a say in some of that.
Well, it sounds like the voters really need to get educated
They do.
on this particular race because it's going to impact them. By the way, you've interviewed all of these candidates. You can go on OK Energy today, just Google it up, and you can see Jerry's interviews with all three of the Republican, and that's where the action is going to be. There will be a general election, but everybody knows which color the state tilts, and that's why we're spending so much time on this particular race. Final question. Campaign donations. We won't know till the race is over when we see the filings, but do you think the candidates are taking donations from power companies, energy producers, and utilities?
Yes, of course they are. And I would assume, and maybe I'm wrong, but that a lot of the major utilities are pouring money into these races. I would think that the former Senate leader, Brian Bigman, probably is receiving a lot of that money. Wouldn't you think?
One would assume,
Yes.
based upon the amount of airtime and commercials that he has. We really won't know the answer to that until after the election.
No, but we'll be able to, review the campaign contribution records and at least report on who got how much money and when did they get it.
I think here's another safe assumption that Mr. Hornback and Mr. Ray are just trying to get into a runoff with Senator Bigman.
I would think so. And if I'm guessing, I would say if there is a runoff, it would be between Bigman and Ray.
It's an interesting thing. You never can tell what Oklahomans are going to do.
No, not at all.
There are going to be a lot of people that are going to be voting on this with not a lot of information. We have a runoff. There will be tons of it. Other media will join into this and be looking into this, and people will be covering the candidates. But that's only if Mr. Bigman, who we believe is the front runner, doesn't get 50% plus one. They got to do that.
Yes.
Anything under that, runoff. And then runoffs in Oklahoma, don't place any bets.
No, not at all. And you remember that there has been some interest historically, Scott. If you recall, Bob Anthony, some elections ago, had the highest support of any corporation commission candidate ever statewide. And I believe it was a record in terms of the support of all the statewide candidates.
Which leads to the following question. Has Bob Anthony endorsed anybody?
Bob Anthony has endorsed Russell Ray. And Ray had his support even, I think, as he was considering a bid for that particular race. So I think Ray likes to position himself as maybe not another Bob Anthony, but certainly in the mold of Bob Anthony, being conservative, challenging of the recommendations that come to him from his staff, and regarding any of the proposed rate hikes that are coming from the utilities.
It'll be interesting with Mr. Hornback, who's in the pipeline business, and that automatically leads you to think in Tulsa about the Williams companies, and we'll see how that factors in. That, I mean, he peels off just enough support from which we believe to be the front runner, Mr. Bingman, that this could be interesting.
It
A lot of
could.
issues
And,
here.
what's interesting about Hornback is he's a Republican and a union organizer. Typically, union organizers you'd think of are as being Democrats.
And Democrats cannot vote in the Republican primary.
That's right.
Independents can vote in the Democrat primary, but it's not set up that way. So this is hardcore Republicans. So having a union organizer on the R side, people have been known to go change their registration just to vote in primaries. That happens. Okay, you can follow Jerry by going to OK Energy today, and we do a weekly video right here that you can see, and I'm sure that we'll be talking a lot on that, which will be out Monday morning.
Yes.
There's no early voting Monday. That will be in person Tuesday. Early voting's Thursday, Friday, Saturday. And Jerry Bohnen will stay on top of this. You can subscribe to Jerry's newsletter, which right now I'd suggest you do to stay on top of this issue at OK Energy Today. Sign up. He does not sell your email address. He does not give it away, any of those things.
Nope.
Give it to advertisers so you can get that daily newsletter from Jerry in your mailbox, just like I do every morning. Jerry Bohnen, OK Energy Today. We'll be looking forward to the results on Tuesday, and we'll be talking to you again soon.
Okay, sounds good.